What's up, everybody? Welcome back to our series about kratom addiction and trauma. So, we're at the point in this series where we are going to begin our ascent into some of the most rewarding aspects of trauma recovery and healing. And that is the reclaiming and rebuilding of our lives after trauma. And so, as we're going on this ascent up this big mountain where we're going to be standing at the mountaintop here very soon, there are things that we still need to work on in this process. And so these next couple videos are going to be about some things that we are going to probably need to work on at some point in the process of our healing. And so today's video is going to be about resentment and forgiveness. And this is something that somebody asked about, and I was glad that they did because I knew that this was an important thing that we were going to need to cover in this series. So we're going to get into that today. And I'm going to let you know that at the end of this video, things are going to take more of a faith-based focus. And I'll give you the heads up when we're going to start to go into that. And you're welcome to just join us in the next video if that's something that you're not into. So I'll let you know at the end. Okay, cool. So starting off with resentment. This is something that's very common when we have experienced trauma. It's only natural that when we have gone through something painful and traumatic, that we will remember the original offense that happened and we will remember the person that did that to us. You know, this is just a natural coping mechanism, and it's a sign that, our brains and our bodies are basically like looking for ways to protect us. And resentment is an example of this because if you think about it, on that kind of just like instinctual level, that when our brains and our bodies subconsciously remember the original offense and the person that did it, it is a way of like self-protection. But there is a point where resentment can become very counterproductive, and it can cause us a lot of pain, and it can waste a lot of mental real estate in our minds. And we can spend a lot of time wasting it on being resentful towards what has happened to us and who has done it to us. So we're really gonna like kind of try to break this down today. And as with all our videos, I'm going to share my experience, and then we're going to talk about more with how I came to understand things on a deeper level, and I'm just going to share some examples with how you can as well. So, okay, let's get into my experience. All right, I'm going to start off by explaining a little bit about my family. Resentment literally like runs in my blood. On my dad's side of the family, it's this kind of joke, but it's also this unspoken thing, this like known thing about my dad's side of the family, which is like the Irish Catholic, Italian side of the family of where I came from and like all of that. And it's this known thing that this side of the family, if you cross them in any way, then they're basically going to hate you forever. And so that's kind of like a funny way of saying that this side of my family is very resentful towards anybody that has done anything to them. And my father, who passed away almost 10 years ago, went through a really rough relationship and divorce with my mother. And it was basically my mom's choice to leave my dad and leave our family. And my dad had open heart surgery 2 years before my mother decided that she didn't want to stay with him, and she left him, and subsequently our family dissolved. And this was something that was really difficult for my dad. My dad loved my mother. He gave her the world. He built her a farm to have horses on and to raise me and my sister on. And he really sacrificed a lot and gave a lot to my mom. He worked very hard. He withstood all of the mental and physical abuse that she put him through. So my dad really tried to make it work with my mom. And at the end, when it was her choice to still leave and to break apart our family, obviously my dad was very hurt by it. And over the years, he carried that hurt with him. And towards the end of his life, it was about 6 months before he passed, I went and I spent a week with him. And it was one of the most special times that I had with my dad, where it was just me and him. And he showed me different recipes that had ran in my Italian side of the family. And we talked a lot about different things that I've never talked to about my dad before. I was older, so it allowed the space for us to be able to relate on a different level. And interestingly, I felt it in my bones that my dad wasn't going to be around longer. So I knew at that time that it was really special that we were able to spend this time with one another. One of the things that I asked my dad when we were having some of these conversations was, Dad, would you ever forgive my mom? And he said, without skipping a beat, no, I never would. And I was like, well, why wouldn't you? I was surprised that, it had been at that point, I don't even know how many years, probably, I don't know, over 20 years, maybe more, 30 years maybe, since this had happened between my mom and my dad. And he said something that I'll never forget. He said, because she's a snake in the grass. And I understood what he was implying at that time, but as things kind of moved on, I understood it more as the years passed. And he passed, and then as the years went on, I came to a different understanding of what that meant. But basically, what that meant, the bottom line of what that meant, was that he was still resentful towards my mom and that he could never trust her again. And so I share a little bit about this experience with my dad, and then I'll start sharing about my own personal experience that I went through my own life where I was hurt by people that I loved, and things were taken from me that could not have been replaced. And I myself started to contend with resentment. And how we can interweave this into kratom addiction and recovery is that for some reason, and we've talked about this in other videos, that kratom addiction, especially when I was in the worst parts of my addiction, it had this way of taking my resentments and magnifying them. I don't know if it's because of the pain and the suffering that I was in my addiction. I don't really know exactly what it was, but I would, every morning when I would wake up after having broken sleep, going into withdrawals all night because my kratom doses didn't last any longer than like 3 hours, 4 hours max. I would wake up, and it was like, as my brain was becoming conscious, it was like the booting up of a computer, and like my mind would start to go through everything that everyone had done to me. And it was like how I would start every day. And it would cause this resentment and this anger. And I would find myself in this place. And this lasted for years, you guys, because I was in my kratom addiction for 3 years. And the last 2 years were really tough. I had some situations happen in my family which really kind of jump-started me even considering taking kratom. Because my dad had passed a year before, and I had planned a trip that meant so much to me that I was hoping that my family would be able to join me on, because the only thing that we had experienced before that was basically funerals and weddings. So it was always these like busy, really emotional events, and we never got to spend any quality one-on-one time with each other. And for me, I interpret love as quality time. And so I had planned this trip with my family members, and it ended up all just basically like falling apart towards the end. And I was so resentful against the people in my family that were involved in this. And I went into my kratom addiction with that resentment, piggybacked on top of the grief of losing my father the year before. So it really created this like perfect storm for this resentment to brood and to brew. And I found myself in a place where when I finally had quit kratom and I was getting into the years after and I was getting into my recovery process, I started to realize that the resentment that I was still carrying was not going to do me any good. And I realized how much time that it was wasting. And I realized how I was not able to logically understand that the original thing that had happened between me and these people and these original offenses. And also keep in mind too, like I had these recent things happen, but I was also having the upheaval of my childhood trauma coming to the surface. So like there was all of this resentment, and I had to come to terms with the fact where like logically it wasn't making sense that I was spending all of this time and all of this energy basically hating on the people that had done this to me and wasting the time on basically hyper focusing on the original trauma or the original offense that the resentment was resulting from. So I came to this crossroads in my recovery. I wasn't able to do it when I was still in active addiction because the addiction had hijacked my mind and had hijacked my body and my life. And I wasn't able to like logically break down the source of the resentment and, to just try to make sense of all of it. So it took me getting into about a year of my recovery. I had to get through the pause. I had to get through that suffering of the post-acute withdrawal stuff. And then I started to really unpack this resentment. And then I eventually got into the forgiveness process, which we're going to unpack in just a moment. So with the resentment stuff, and I'm just going to give examples of what helped me. And they're just going to be very simple things that can translate into your everyday life. So for me, like I said, what started to really dawn on me was that, okay, I am wasting so much time. And what was happening was there was this basically I was taken out of my everyday life, out of the present moment. And I was taken on this I don't know how to articulate it clearly, but I was getting stuck in my mind where I would be doing my everyday tasks. I would be living my everyday life. And then all of a sudden, it's my mind would just take off with this event that happened to me. Sometimes it would be from triggers. Sometimes, the light would hit something, just right. And I would be reminded of something from my childhood and pain or trauma that I went through. Sometimes there was no good reason at all. And all of a sudden, it was I would find myself thinking about the original offense of what somebody had done to me. And so what I started to get into was a very basic grounding practice, is I think one of the ways that they describe this mental and psychological practice, where I would start to focus on when my mind would take off with me like that, on what I was doing in the very moment that I was in. And I would bring myself back into my body and my mind in this very moment. And I wouldn't allow things to get hijacked and carried off into dwelling on something that had happened to me and hating on the person that had done it. So what I started to do, and I'm going to let you guys know that this is a thing that I do to this day. I am not completely perfect. I have, the things that I have gone through in my life, it has taken me a long time to get to this place where I am able to have a lot of healing from it, but I still struggle with I'm flesh and blood. I still struggle with things that you guys do. I still struggle when I'm tired or, I'm thinking about something that somebody has done to me. When it just comes across, crosses my mind, I still feel pain from that. I'm a highly sensitive person. I know that that's a term that can be like thrown around a lot these days, but I'm creative. I have always been, from the time I was young, a very sensitive person. I feel my emotions very strongly. So that lends itself to me feeling the offenses and the pain that I have gone through from initial trauma and offenses, and that it playing out. And so that's, like I was saying, my brain and my body's way of protecting myself. But there comes a point where that starts to get in your way. So like what I do now to this day, because I still experience it, sometimes on a daily basis, is when my mind starts to go to that place, I literally bring my thoughts and my focus back to what I am doing. And I ground myself in my physical body by taking my focus and putting it into the very like basic things that I am doing in my everyday life, whether it be doing the dishes, whether it be when I'm at work and I'm in the middle of a task. And I bring my focus back to my hands. And as I'm working, I focus on my hands and I'm focusing on the movements. I work in a kitchen. I do a lot of chopping. I do a lot of preparing of food. And I will focus on my hands, touching those vegetables or, chopping those herbs. Or, if I'm in the middle of a task where, I'm doing, an action, I will break it down methodically into my brain and go, okay, I am walking to this place. I am putting out this food. I am picking up this spoon. And I will take my mind and I will focus specifically on the task that I'm doing, broken down into each step. And what this does for me is it interrupts this chain of like my mind, getting taken off with and thinking about something that's happened to me or the person that I'm angry at for doing it. And so that's an example of something that I do. I also, here's an example as well. Now that I'm into this part of my recovery where I'm in 3 years, I'm able to logically understand that like, okay, when I go into that grounding practice of like, looking at everything around me and like bringing myself back into the present moment, my brain, even though it's getting, wants to kind of go off and think about and dwell on what has happened to me and the person that's done it, my brain can logically go, okay, that happened when I was a child, or that happened 20 years ago, or that happened in the past. It happened recently, but it happened in the past. I am in this present moment right now, and that is not a part of this present moment. And I know that what that's going to do is it's going to take me out of this present moment, and it's essentially going to steal my joy, and it's going to steal my peace. And I'm not going to let it do that. And so what that allows me to do is it allows me to logically break down that, okay, this is what is going on right now. And I'm not going to allow this past thing to affect me. Also, I apologize for having technical difficulties right now, but I need to lower my light. Sorry. I realized that my light is a little high and it can lend itself to I don't get migraines much, but when I do, they suck. If you've ever experienced them, you'll know. So I just needed to lower that a little bit because I could feel it kind of doing something to my brain. I apologize for technical difficulties. I'm going to take a drink of water too. So logically, I bring myself back into my focus. That's an example of something. Another example of something is, and we're going to start to really get into that in a moment, is that, forgiveness is something that's very difficult. I didn't mention when it came to my dad that my dad passed away. He literally died bringing the hatred for my mother to his deathbed. And so I saw my dad carrying this unforgiveness. I saw my dad carrying this resentment. And sure, my dad had health issues that he was born with, but there were other things that were a result, I believe, of this resentment and this unforgiveness that he carried with him. So this is something as well that I use as a daily practice, because you guys, like, I pretty much deal with this stuff on a daily basis of, having these thoughts of, different like parts of resentment from things that have happened. What's a really big bummer too is that when you come to terms with things that people have done in the past and then they continue to do things, that's a really big bummer, and it lends itself to really putting in a lot of work when it comes to resentment and forgiveness. But what I was going to say is that an example of something that I do in my everyday life is, forgiveness is basically like a practice of surrender. And regardless of what you believe, we're going to get into the faith-based aspect of forgiveness at the end of this video, but you don't have to believe in anything to understand the importance and the power of forgiveness. I'll explain a little bit about just, the daily practice that I have to do, and then we're going to start to get into actual, what forgiveness is and all that kind of stuff. So basically, to just wrap up that thought, for me, it's a daily surrender and a daily practice to forgive. And forgiveness is not easy, but it is something that will free us from the enslavement that not only unforgiveness can put us in, but also the resentment from that unforgiveness. And it's hard, you guys. Like, I am flesh and blood, like I just said a moment ago. And like, when I've been hurt, I've been hurt deeply. And so there was a part of me that sometimes, as I started to get into actually breaking down what forgiveness meant, there was a part of me that thought like, well, if I forgive somebody, I'm letting them off the hook for what they did. And I'm basically condoning what they did. But that's not the case. And we're going to start to explain that in a moment. But to wrap that up with the daily things that I do, I surrender daily and I forgive daily for what has happened to me and what's been done to me. I want to say too, before we start to get into forgiveness, that like, as you know, like this stuff is not easy. And that's why I consider rebuilding after trauma and, the healing process itself from trauma, PTSD, CPTSD it's like an ascent. It's like we're climbing a mountain. And there's going to be a point when you stand at that mountaintop and you can look back down on like where you've climbed from, and you can look at like the beautiful horizon before you. But there's a good part of this process where you're climbing up the mountain. We talked about in our last video how like acceptance and integration has this part of it where you're like trudging through this like swamp in this mud. And like, I like to think about like the ascent of rebuilding and reclaiming our lives after trauma it's like climbing a mountain. And is it easy? No, it's not easy. So dealing with resentment and then forgiveness, it is not easy. But it's something that as you put in the work and as you climb that mountain of, getting past resentment and understanding and getting through forgiveness, you're getting to the top of that mountain, and you're going to stand on that on the top of that mountain at some point, and it's going to be amazing. So, okay, so forgiveness, we're going to just get into like, just a basic overview of it. We'll get into the faith-based stuff in a moment, but like, I've heard this saying, and I might butcher it right now. If I do, forgive me, pun intended. I've heard it said that unforgiveness is like swallowing poison that you want the person that has hurt you to swallow, but instead that you take the poison yourself and you expect for them to die from it. And I may not have said that right, but I think I got the general idea of it. That when we hold on to unforgiveness, we're sitting there and we are focusing on what has been done to us and the person that's done it, or the thing, or whatever the situation was that has, hurt us in some sort of way. And when we hold on to unforgiveness, we are basically swallowing the poison of that and expecting for the other person to die from it. And they never will, is the thing. And so I was talking about how my dad carried unforgiveness his entire life until the day that he died. He died hating my mom. He went to the grave hating my mom. And I saw that. And when I asked him if he would ever forgive my mom, he said no. He said it with a cuss too, but I'm not going to say it. He basically said like, F no. And I said, why? And he said, she's a snake in the grass. And he sneered when he said it. And I sensed the unforgiveness. I felt his unforgiveness. And my dad suffered. He had health issues that he was born with, like I said, a heart condition. But he struggled with addiction. He was covered head to toe in the worst psoriasis lesions that you could ever imagine. And he was a very sensitive guy too, just like me. I think that's where I got it from. But like, he was devastated by what my mom had done to him. And he carried that resentment and he carried that anger. And I saw it physically on his body, and I saw it in who he was as a person. And I use that as an example because it's like when you see somebody who is carrying that unforgiveness, it takes over everything. And I went through this and it kind of came to a head in my addiction, like I was talking about when we were discussing resentment a moment ago. Like, you could literally see the pain and the suffering and of my addiction, but also this resentment that I was carrying. And people that interact with you, they're not going to know what's going on with you, but they're going to know that there's something boiling under the surface. And people sense this kind of stuff. And so it translates into your waking life when there is unforgiveness. So like, how can we start to break this down? Like, we're just going to do like a general thing first that like, and this is stuff that I have found peace with. Faith is a huge component of this to me. That's when I really like cracked the nut of like what forgiveness is and how to do it. But we're just going to do some like basic stuff first that doesn't have any sort of like a faith-based base to it. It doesn't matter what you believe, okay? This goes on in science, that what goes up must come down. What is planted is going to grow. What goes out, what you put out there is going to come back to you. And this is something that I found a lot of. Is peace the right way to say it? Maybe satisfaction, because I don't know about for you, but for me, when things that have been done to me, or, things that have been taken from me that cannot be replaced, like huge, pain and trauma and stuff that has happened in my life, I have found satisfaction in the knowing that what has been done to you and what the person has done, that there is going to be a cause and effect by this. It doesn't matter what you believe, like, natural law, like I said, like, the laws of physics, the laws of science, that like whatever is put out is going to come back to you. Some people call it karma. Some people call it what goes around comes around. But I want you to know, and I want you to rest easy in the fact that what has been done to you and the person that has caused it, that there's going to be something that's going to come back to them. It doesn't matter what you believe, but know that. And know that when you have been hurt, especially a lot of us have gone through really rough childhoods. When you're a kid that has gone through something, that is at the hands of an adult or, whatever the case may be, that there is a great cause and effect to this. So please know that. Please know that there will be justice for what has happened to you. You may not see it though. It may not be something where that person has paid for what they did, but it will happen because what goes around comes around. So that's just a general overview of it. When it comes to forgiveness too, like I was saying, it's a surrender. There comes a point where we need to let go. And forgiveness, this is a big aspect too that I want to explain, that forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you. And like I was saying, how much my dad suffered in his unforgiveness and how much I suffered in mine, there is a point where there is a surrender and a letting go that needs to happen. And if it is just a surrendering to the knowing that whatever has happened to you, that there will be a consequence to that to the person who has caused it. Sometimes it's just a surrendering to that. Sometimes it's just a surrendering to the life that you deserve. Because think about it, like, let's logically look at it, that like, if you're going to live your best life, like if you're going to live the life that you deserve, spending all of this time and allowing this unforgiveness to take up this mental landscape, this mental real estate in your brain, it's going to take away from the life that you deserve and the joy and the peace that you deserve in your life today. So I think that when you can rationally start to look at it like, okay, this isn't doing anybody any good. It's not going to get back at the person who's hurt me. And it's not going to help me at all. And actually, it's going to cause me to suffer anymore. So like, what does it look like to let it go? What it looks like to let it go is on a daily basis. And I still do this to this day, you guys. It's a daily basis, like logically looking at it like, okay. And I bring myself into kind of like a grounding technique again, where I look around at my home. I look at Lake Michigan, which I am so blessed and fortunate to live right on. I look at my job. I look at like the people in my life that I love. I look at our guitar collection that I'm able to just like be so thankful for, that I started off when I started playing guitar years ago, gosh, over 20 years ago now. I had a pawn shop guitar that was often out of tune because I didn't even know how to tune it by myself. And now I am able to have, be surrounded by beautiful instruments. I look at these things like that, that's just, example, personal example, but like, for you, it may be like looking at the meal in front of you. It may be as simple as that, like, because being in addiction, you're still suffering a lot of times. It may be as simple as like, what? I've woken up today, even though it hurts. I have a roof over my head. I know that a lot of us go through a lot of challenges when we're in our addiction and recovery process, but it's all about finding those little things that we can focus on. And, maybe it may not be that easy, to find good things that we have. Maybe it's like, a declaration, like, what? I'm not going to give this unforgiveness and this resentment the power to control my mind and my body and get me all worked up and angry and take over my day. I am not going to let it control me. And you stand up firm and you focus on what you're doing in your life right now, even if it sucks. You know what? For me, sometimes it was as easy as like picking up YouTube and looking up a video about like something that brought me joy in that moment. Sometimes it was just like dog videos or something, like, or, I love watching like guitar pedal reviews, like things that gave me just a moment of solace where like in that very moment, I was, focusing on that. I'm not going to let that resentment take over in this very moment. And I'm going to find joy and peace in this very moment. Okay, so there's some examples of just like some basic stuff. So, okay, now just, letting you know, we're going to get into the faith-based aspect of forgiveness right now. And if you don't want to stay, it's totally cool. If you'd like to stay and check it out and this is not what you're about, that's totally cool too. And if you'd like to just like click off, you can come to the next video where we're going to pick up into something else. But now we're going to get into the faith-based stuff. So, okay, cool. You guys, this is really what helped me to come to a deeper level of understanding with forgiveness. And as I'm looking at the time on this video, this is going to be a longer one. So buckle up, as I like to say with this, that like, okay, so when I started to understand forgiveness from a faith-based perspective, it was really when I was set free from my unforgiveness. Okay, so let's break it down on a very basic level. Dude, I love Jesus. Like, I love Jesus for so many reasons and so many ways, but I think that this is probably the top two. Like, first one has got to be that, like, Jesus is like he's like the embodiment of God's love for us. But the second reason is, for me, the forgiveness aspect of what Jesus is, what his work on the cross was about, and then also how Jesus's work on the cross is like the reconciliation for our unforgiveness. So like, okay, what does this even mean? So like, all right, let's break it down on a basic level first. Like, we all are flawed. We all have things about us that we have made mistakes, we've lied, we've cheated, we've stolen, we've hurt other people. So all of us are flawed. And that separates us from God, okay? Because like God in his essence is like pure holiness. Like God, our creator, is like perfection. There's no flaws. Like God has made no mistakes. And in his holiness and in that purity from his holiness and in our humanness, that there creates a division between us. So Jesus's whole purpose and the like reason, like God's love for us embodied, and Jesus's whole purpose is to be that reconciliation between us and God, in us and our humanness and our brokenness and our flaws, and God and his holiness. So like back in the day, in like biblical times before Jesus came, the priests would do like sacrifices of animals as a way to like atone for this flawed nature of our humanness that we all have. And so why that was done was because there needed to be basically like the sacrifice of something innocent as a way to atone us to God's holiness. And so that's what Jesus is Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. And by him coming and dying on the cross for us, that pays the price for all of our sin. Like I hate saying sin because it can turn a lot of people off, but basically like sin is a way of saying like all of the flaws that we've ever had, like all of our brokenness. So when I started to like really understand that, and it was when I was in the depths of my Kratom addiction that this really started to make sense to me, because before I was kind of stuck in my pridefulness where I'm like, whatever, I don't need God. I am God. That's what I believed. And I don't need anybody to like pay the price for what I've done or to save me, because I didn't think that I had done anything wrong. But when I was in the depths of my addiction and I had seen the mess that I had made of myself and my life, I realized like, oh my gosh, like there's nothing I can do to ever like make this right. And that's when I got the gospel on that deep level. And that's what the gospel is basically what we're talking about. Like who Jesus is, what he's about, why he died. And this is why he died for us, because of everything that we've done and that brokenness that we have. And there would not be this forgiveness. That's the point of it, is this forgiveness. There would not be this forgiveness if Jesus was not sacrificed for us. And it's like ultimately like God's love letter to us. And I'm covered in chills right now, because like it is the most purest, most beautiful, true love that we will ever have. And when we are able to like understand and tap into the power of that love and this forgiveness that we all receive, but we don't deserve, like this is the stuff that will like change lives and free us from addictions and set us free from also our own unforgiveness that we have. So that was for me like the turning point in my resentment and my unforgiveness, was when I was able to see that like, dang, who am I? I've made so many mistakes. Who am I to say that like I should be holding this grudge against this person? Because like I have no place to say that like I don't forgive you, because I've made mistakes and I've, done things that are wrong. So when I really started to see that, and I really started to break it down, that like, okay, if I deserve forgiveness, then that person who has hurt me deserves forgiveness too. And one of the most profound things that was like the complete game changer in this process for me as well is, and I'm just going to name drop a book that really helped me to kind of like wrap my mind around this, it's this book called Forgiving What You Can't Forget by Lisa Turnquist, I think is her name. And this book was so cool because it really like broke down this next thing that we're going to get into. So I'd suggest like picking it up if you're interested in like, getting into it more. But like, basically it talks about like what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. And we're just going to touch on a couple topics, and then we're going to get into like the real like game-changing thing for me that happened to me is that like, okay, what forgiveness is releasing, surrendering our offenses that we are carrying towards that person to God to handle in his perfect way and his perfect time. And what it isn't is letting the person off the hook and saying that what they did was ever going to be okay. Actually, I should say it this way, because it is letting them off the hook by your own perspective and letting it go in from your own perspective. But what it means is that you are giving it to God. You are surrendering it to God to handle in his own way. And it's not that God is going to let it off the hook. It's that and this is something that is very profound as well, is that like when we hold on to the resentment and we hold on to the unforgiveness towards somebody or something that's happened to us, we are basically playing God. And I know that may seem like a lot, but think about it. Like, we are not God. We do not have the right to seek any sort of vengeance or justice or retaliation towards anybody or anything. That is God's job. And when I started to understand that, I found a lot of peace in that, and it helped me to let go of that, like, okay, this isn't my job to hold on to this anymore. And I love God, and I trust God, and I trust that his perfect way and his perfect timing for something is going to, he's going to take care of everything that has happened. Like, he's going to take care of anything that has to happen to that person, or anything that has to do with me as being on the receiving end of, the trauma, the abuse, all that kind of stuff. He's going to take care of me, and he's going to take care of that person in whatever sort of consequence that's deserved. And I found a lot of peace in that. So here's the thing too, that like was a game changer for me that I just mentioned a moment ago that we were going to get into. Dude, this is deep. Get ready. Okay. So sometimes in our humanness and in our flesh and blood, because God knows He created us. He knows our every thought. He knows our every breath, and He knows our every challenge and our every struggle. He created us to be sensitive. He created us that in that sensitivity that we were going to hold on to that resentment because we were hurt by what's happened to us. He knows that about us. And He loves us, and He is patient and kind and gentle, and His grace and His mercy endures forever. And He knows that we struggle with the pain of what has happened to us. And here is the beauty of Jesus. And part of the reason why I love Jesus, one of the top reasons why I love Jesus, is that, like I said in the beginning of this, that like Jesus, what Jesus did on the cross for us is what covers all of everything that we've ever done wrong. And what's so beautiful, gosh, I love this so much. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for this. Is that like when somebody has done something to us that we don't know how to forgive, I'll be straight up, I don't know how to forgive what has happened to me when I was a child. I don't know. I don't know in my humanness. But what I do know, and this is something that will set you free, what I do know is that what I don't know how to forgive, that Jesus' finished work on the cross does know how to forgive. And that Jesus' finished work on the cross and the blood that He shed literally covers all of our sin, mine and the person who has hurt me. So although I may not in my human mind and my human body understand how to forgive the person who has hurt me, I know that through Jesus's finished work on the cross, that they are forgiven through that, and that I can extend that same forgiveness that has been offered to me through that finished work on the cross to the person who has hurt me. And I pray that every single day, you guys. Before I even pray for my own family, I pray for God to forgive me for the things that I've done that separate me from Him. And I then pray right after me for those who have hurt me. And I pray that they be forgiven through Jesus' finished work on the cross, and I extend that same forgiveness that's been given to me to them. And so thus, in this beautiful way, this beautiful full circle way, I am forgiving them, though my human mind doesn't know how to do it yet. And so this is very profound. And this is the kind of stuff that sets you free. Not only from unforgiveness, but this is the stuff that sets you free from addictions too, because like there's a reason why, you guys, in the 12-step process, there is a step in it where you make amends with people. And, you know, first you do, they call it a fearless moral inventory of like things that you've done, you know, yourself, that you've made mistakes and that you've hurt people. But then you make amends with those people that you've hurt. Because if you have this kind of stuff going on in you, not only things that you've done, but what people have done to you too, and you're carrying resentment and unforgiveness, like this is a huge roadblock when it comes to recovery. Because resentment and unforgiveness and, you know, things that goes hand in hand with things that you've done to hurt people too, that's the kind of stuff that will make you want to use. And that's the kind of stuff that when you are in recovery, that like it's not going to be easy to stay sober, because this is the kind of stuff that hurts so bad. And so it's a huge aspect of recovery, like not only you making things right that you've done to others, but, you know, also like letting go of what other people have done to you. So, and I get that this can be a lot to wrap your mind around. And I get it that like, you know, this isn't something this is an everyday thing for me, you guys. I still have to go through this every single day. I have my dad's blood running through my veins. I am half my father, where like I have it literally in the fiber of my being to hate my mom until the day that I die. But I made not only a pact with myself and a pact with God that I wouldn't do that, But I have seen the beauty of like forgiveness, because like the thing that like happens when you do this is that when you surrender your pain and your suffering and your sadness and your trauma and your resentment and all of that kind of stuff, when you surrender it to God and you say, you know what, God, I trust you, and I trust that you're going to handle this in the perfect way and at the perfect time. And then I can just wash my hands of this, and I can focus on my life and my recovery and my relationships now. What that does is that frees you, and you're able to, in your everyday life, have this weight. You know, unforgiveness is this weight on you. It causes health issues. Like I told you, I saw in my father. It causes you to age prematurely. It causes you to have this vibe and this air about you where like people can see something under the surface that like they're afraid of. You know, literally, like I've had that response from people where people are just like kind of sketched out and like kind of like weirded out by me when I'm carrying this unforgiveness and this resentment, just like on like the external of who I am. You carry it on your face. And so let's end with this, that like, you know, God is so good. And there oftentimes will be these learning experiences and like this process of like having to let go and surrender and trust God. And it is not easy. I wish it was just this miraculous, like it just happens like that, but oftentimes it's not. And I believe that God intends for it to be that way, because what this does in turn is it allows us to like deepen our relationship with God, because we become dependent on him in this. We become dependent on him for our peace and for our joy. Because as we surrender this unforgiveness and this resentment every single day, like he is the crucial element of that. You know, like we can't do it on our own. I can't do it on my own. I started to describe, if you've gotten to this part of the video and like you're not completely down with faith, you know, I gave some examples of stuff that was like not faith-based before this, but I'll be straight up with you. Like I could not do this on my own without this understanding of like, you know, Jesus's finished work on the cross, the forgiveness that I've been given, and then the forgiveness that I can give to others. I wouldn't be able to understand it. But if you've made it this far, you know, this is something that like you may not be down with, and I'm totally cool with that. But this is something that was integral for me. You can take it or leave it. So here it is, you guys, resentment and forgiveness. And we are going to continue moving forward with our ascent up the mountain. And we're going to get into another very valuable topic and tool that I want to get into with you guys. I've been wanting to get into it with you for a while, and that is setting boundaries, because this is going to be a really important thing in our healing process. So we're going to get into that next time. And then as we start going up the ascent into the rebuilding and the reclaiming of our lives after trauma and healing from PTSD and CPTSD, we're going to get into some really amazing, uplifting, awesome stuff as we get into these videos. So I will see you then, and thanks for watching. Bye.